Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's get started with the big story we're tracking. There has been some terrible news today from Kuwait. Several Indians were among at least 49 people killed after a fire erupted in a building housing workers in Kuwait's Kuwait City. The incident happened around 6 a.m. local time. The fire started in a kitchen in the six-story building, which reportedly had nearly 160 people living in it. They're workers of the same company. Eyewitnesses said some people jumped from the fifth floor of the building to escape the fire and died. Prime Minister Narendra Modi tweeted to offer his condolences to the families of the fire victims. He said, "The fire mishap in Kuwait City is saddening. My thoughts are with all those who have lost their near and dear ones. I pray that the injured recover the earliest." The Indian Embassy in Kuwait is closely monitoring the situation and working with the authorities there to assist the affected. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar said the Indian ambassador had gone to the site of the incident. He said, deeply shocked by the news of the fire incident in Kuwait City. There are reportedly over 40 deaths and over 50 have been hospitalized. Our ambassador has gone to the camp. We are awaiting further information. Now, the Indian Embassy in Kuwait has issued a helpline number and said it will give all possible assistance to those who need it. The official ex-handle of the Indian ambassador to Kuwait, Adarsh Sweka, said Ambassador Sweka visited the Al Adan hospital where over 30 Indian workers injured in today's fire incident have been admitted, met a number of patients and assured them of full assistance from the embassy. Almost all are reported to be stable by hospital authorities. Junior Foreign Minister Kirti Vardhan Singh will go to Kuwait to help the Indians injured in the fire. That's what the Ministry of External Affairs said today. As directed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Minister of State for External Affairs KV Singh is urgently travelling to Kuwait to oversee assistance to those injured in the fire tragedy and to coordinate with local authorities for early repatriation of mortal remains of those who've died in this unfortunate incident. That's what the spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs said today at a press conference. Now, the Indian ambassador to Kuwait said, met the patients and assured them of full assistance from the embassy. Remember, Indians constitute 21%, that's 1 million of the total population of Kuwait and 30% of its workforce, approximately 9 lakh people. Now, this is important. A senior police officer in Kuwait said the building in which the fire occurred was used to house workers, and there were many workers there. Dozens were rescued, but unfortunately there were many deaths as a result of smoke inhalation from the fire. We always alert and warn against cramming too many workers into housing accommodation, he said, without providing details about the workers' type of employment or place of origin. The fire was contained and authorities were investigating its cause. Deputy Prime Minister of Kuwait, Sheikh Fahad Al Yusuf Al Sabah, visited the site of the fire and ordered the arrest of the building's owner. That's what reports suggest. He said, unfortunately, the greed of real estate owners is what leads to these incidents. Kuwait's health ministry has said the injured have been admitted to various hospitals. The majority were sent to Al Adan hospital and are currently undergoing treatment. Some reports suggest that the owner of the building that caught fire is also an Indian.
Unfortunately, the greed of the property owners is what leads to these matters. I will call the Director of Municipalities and we will talk to all property owners. Any property violation will be removed early morning. Either the property owner removes it himself or I will give instructions to the municipality to remove them. This is the decision that should have been imposed a long time ago and be implemented in the municipality. But unfortunately, there was neglect from the part of the real estate dealers. They violate, and this is the result of the violations. As we speak, there are 41 people killed, and the reason is the real estate dealers, unfortunately.
Well, it appears that what I saw on television, that it was sort of a gas leak. And it happened after 3 o'clock, around 3 o'clock in the morning. So I do not know why we got the news after so many hours. But anyway, what is important to recognize is that our embassy is doing its utmost and the Kuwaiti authorities are also doing what they should be doing. And let us hope that, the situation, of course, has been brought under control, but, you know, obviously the Kuwaiti authorities have to make sure that such a terrible thing doesn't occur, which means the buildings have to be constructed and maintained properly, and so the whole thing has to be gone into, which they are doing. But as I said earlier, government of India is doing its utmost to, bring back, the bodies of those who have unfortunately died, and give assistance to the injured. I believe our MOS has already been, maybe on its way. Though I should add that Kuwait Embassy has a sizable section. It's a big embassy to look after our people. So I'm sure the embassy will be able to do whatever is necessary. The government has to take the necessary action with utmost speed. But at the same time, whether you can move out, say 5,000 people just like that, that is a different question. So I'm sure that Kuwait administration will do what is appropriate. So first figure out the problem and then take action. Yes, unfortunately, that is correct. I do not think that Indian workers in that part of the world, including Kuwait, are sort of treated in the correct way. After all, they are also entitled to safe accommodation, reasonable working hours, and a reasonable wage. That is not happening. So, Government of India, and let us hope the Modi 3.0 government will take the appropriate action as early as possible. The embassy has enough resources in terms of manpower to do that, and it will be done. But I still am a little sort of intrigued. If it happened at 3 in the morning, around 3 in the morning in Kuwait, and you can calculate the time difference, how come that we in India come to know of this only now? Many are in the ICU, and you know what happens in the ICU. I mean, people who are taken to the ICU, well, if we are lucky, they get well. Otherwise, they will start leaving us. So, obviously, the initial report was a tentative report, but as time goes, unfortunately, the death toll mounted. Well, I mean, the last I saw from an Indian journalist, actually, he's an editor in Kuwait, is that it was 51 and that it might go up because it depends how many are in the ICU. And I did not see a correct number for the number of persons in the ICU. Government has acted with promptly and with a sense of urgency. No, I take it that the Kuwaiti government will do what is necessary. But as I said earlier, declaring X number of buildings unsafe and asking all the people there to get out, well, you can do that provided you give them alternate accommodation by way of tents or otherwise. But, it has to be done in a manner which causes minimum inconvenience and suffering to the people concerned. Well, I'm told, again, going by the news channels, that it is owned by someone from Kerala. Of course, the person who owns the building, well, no, the person who built the building, is the main culprit. I mean, you may buy another building from somebody. Now, if that person had not built it correctly, well, then, you can't say it is the fault of the buyer.
All right, let's take a quick break here on the show, though that's a story that we'll continue to track closely. On the other side, we will closely look at the results of the European Parliament elections.
of southern India's largest cities is facing a water crisis in Bengaluru.
Water is constantly not coming. From the past 2 months, we are not having some water also.
The citizens deserve water security at the very least.
We are going office without a bath.
The acute water shortage really leading to citizens resorting to use of even private water tankers in multiple areas.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
I always feel the first hurdle is the biggest hurdle.
The process is the fruit and it's amazing.
When is the question, whether or not is not the question.
If that were the case, man would have never reached the moon.
World premiere on the 15th of June, only on News9 Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Europe seems to be lurching towards the far right, if the recent European Parliament election results are any indication. Let's take an in-depth look at what has happened and what implications it might have. Results of the 6th to 9th June European Parliament elections, in which about 51% of the 370 million plus electors in 27 European Union countries voted, show gains for right-wing and far-right parties at the cost of mainly left and liberal parties. The centre-right group, European People's Party or EPP, is projected to win the most seats, 186 in the 720-member House. That's 10 more seats compared to 2019. Then too, the EPP was the largest group. The Eurosceptic European Conservatives and Reformists group, which is dominated by Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party, is projected to win 73 seats, a gain of 4. The right-wing Identity and Democracy group, which includes the French opposition leader Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally, is projected to win 58 seats, a gain of 9 seats. The party garnered 31% of the votes compared to the French president's centrist Liberal Party's 15%. This election has dealt a crushing defeat to French President Emmanuel Macron's party in the European parliamentary vote, triggering him to dissolve the French parliament and call for a snap election in a shock move. Macron said he could not ignore the outcome of the European election, in which his pro-Europe Renaissance party performed quite poorly. This despite the fact that he still has another 3 years left of his second term in office. Though Macron has dismissed what he said were absurd rumours about his possible resignation if the far-right National Rally of Marine Le Pen wins in the legislative election, which is now scheduled to be held in 2 rounds on the 30th of June and 7th of July. In a bid to rally support of moderates before the snap election, Macron has urged politicians and voters from the left and the right to regroup and defeat the far right. He said he wants men and women of goodwill who were able to say no to extremes to join together to be able to build a joint project. He added, "I don't want to give the key to power to the far right in 2027. But Macron refused to comment on how he would govern in case of a majority for the far-right National Rally in Parliament and the far-right party's rising star leader Jordan Bardella becoming Prime Minister. National Rally leader Le Pen has been attempting to consolidate the right to further strengthen her post-European election position. Now, like Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz too has endured a painful election where his Social Democrats scored their worst result ever, suffering at the hands of the mainstream conservatives and hard right Alternative for Germany or AfD. In Poland, Prime Minister Donald Tusk's centrist Civic Coalition, a member of the EPP, is set to win the European vote. In Spain as well, the centre-right People's Party, also part of the EPP, came out on top. The results are good news for EPP member and President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who seeks a second 5-year term at the helm of the powerful EU executive arm. In Austria, the count of votes cast plus a projection for postal ballots confirmed that the far-right Freedom Party won, but by a smaller margin than had been forecast. Now remember, members of the European Parliament, or MEPs, are directly elected by citizens of the 27 EU member states. The new parliament will shape the EU's direction for the next 5 years on issues such as climate change, migration, the Green Deal aimed at making Europe climate neutral by 2050, digitization, support for Ukraine, and policies towards Russia, China, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. Voters in the European Parliament elections choose from their national political parties. The winning candidates then become part of Europe-wide political groups in the European Parliament. Almost all major parties in the 27 EU countries are affiliated with one or another of these European groups based on commonalities and ideology. A minimum of 23 MEPs from at least 1/4 of EU member states can form a new group in the European Parliament. Currently, there are 7 groups in the Parliament. No group has been able to achieve a majority in the European Parliament in recent years, but the European People's Party, or EPP, and the Socialists have remained the 2 major groups. With each election, the Parliament has become more fragmented, leading to issue-based coalitions. This year, the right and the far right have grown at the expense of the moderate parties, the Greens, Renew, and Socialists. But pro-Europe progressive groups like the EPP, SND, Renew, and Greens have still managed to win more than 60% of the seats. 2 far-right political parties, Alternative for Germany and Hungarian Fidesz, are not part of any group. Altogether, far-right parties are projected to secure more than 150 seats in the new parliament. Overall, while the EPP has emerged as a clear winner, far-right parties have gained significantly. So what could this mean? The European Parliament mirrors broad political trends across Europe. Many EU countries such as Italy, Finland, and Hungary have right-wing governments. Right-wing parties have made significant gains in Germany and France in recent years. As a result, the position of the right in the European Parliament has also strengthened. These parties are gaining traction from issues such as increased immigration into Europe, national identity, and skepticism towards many EU policies. Their persistent anti-immigrant, anti-EU, and anti-Islam rhetoric has resonated with many voters. This shift has pressured many centre-right parties to adopt harder positions on immigration. There will be increased support for tighter border controls and stricter immigration and asylum rules now in the new parliament. The high costs of green transition goals may also face scrutiny. Although climate action remains generally popular in Europe, many parties exploit the skepticism for specific measures. They've gained support from farmers protesting against emission reduction measures, consumers facing rising energy prices, and industry struggling with declining competitiveness due to the switch from fossil fuels. Even the EPP now aims to overturn the ban on combustion engine cars by 2035. Now, coming back to France for a moment, why has Emmanuel Macron taken such a big gamble and announced a snap poll? Well, Macron is probably hoping that the snap parliamentary election demonstrates that the far right, despite rising, does not yet have the popular support required to win national elections in his country. France has a semi-presidential form of government in which citizens vote separately for parliament and president, and the president appoints the prime minister. The president and the prime minister typically belong to the same political party or coalition. Macron's party is the largest in the French parliament but lacks a majority. This has been a challenge as he has tried to advance his agenda in the legislature since being re-elected president in 2022. If his party emerges victorious in the elections, Macron can govern effectively for the remaining 3 years of his presidency and better take on the challenge of the far right. Now, in the event of a defeat, Macron's own position will remain unaffected, but he may be compelled to appoint a new prime minister from the opposition, perhaps from the far right. That could result in what is known as cohabitation, a situation in which the president and parliament represent opposing political factions. In this scenario, Macron's powers to shape domestic affairs will be significantly reduced. So the question we're asking on Global Lens tonight is this: Just why is Europe moving to the far right? What are the factors that are driving this tectonic shift? What is the larger message from the voters to the left, liberal and centrist parties? And what larger ramifications is this shift to the right likely to have for Europe and beyond?
And the main direction for Europe is clear. It's a center-right Europe, which people gave us. And that means that the European People's Party is in an important role to be ready to negotiate with all the others in a democratic way, but also define the key elements for the next upcoming years, and that is competitiveness and security. Well, the European People's Party is a party of... I'm quite happy that the new opposition party in Hungary, who shows the pro-democratic, pro-European and also the pro-rule of law face of Hungary, that this movement wants to join the European People's Party, and together with people like Donald Tusk in Poland, that shows the real DNA of the European People's Party. I'm very happy about this, and we will continue exactly this path for the future of Europe and for the countries.
All right, let's go across to our panel of experts. Joining me on the show tonight, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, former Indian diplomat. Great to have you back on Global Lens. Chirayu Thakkar, doctoral candidate of international relations at the National University of Singapore, is also back with us. And completing the panel tonight is Dr. Gulshan Sachdeva, professor of Center for European Studies at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University here in New Delhi. A warm welcome to all my guests. Great to have you all on the show. Ambassador Sajjanhar, let me start with you. A simple question. Should alarm bells be ringing for left, liberal and centrist parties across Europe, including for the French President Emmanuel Macron, who's now called a snap parliamentary election? What do you think the voters are really trying to tell these parties through the manner in which they voted in these European Parliament elections?
Yeah, thank you very much, Neha. I think the alarm bells had started ringing quite some time ago. I think this is not the first time that this sort of a thing is happening. I think it's been a steady progression over a period of time, over, last decade or more than that. And I think the red hot button issue as far as the popularity of the right wing is concerned in a large number of countries, and we've seen it in France, we've seen it in Germany, we've seen it in now Italy, of course, where the national government has also been a right-wing government of Giorgia Meloni. We've seen it even in the Nordics, whether it is in Sweden or Finland, that there has been a gradual but significant and substantial shift towards the right. And the basic issue there is, I think, of immigration. There are other matters also, whether it is, focus on free trade, whether it is focus on climate change and what do we need to do about that, etc. Whether there are climate skeptics in that, or there are parties which want their sovereignty to be protected and not enter into any other, greater free trade agreements, or to give more of the rights to Brussels. Those sort of issues are also very much there. But I think the most significant and the most important issue is that of immigration. We have seen that, immigration, particularly from the Middle East countries, the Islamic countries, that has been growing in these countries. And there is a very strong feeling amongst people that while in many of the countries they do provide refuge to them, they do provide them to come in and settle and be generous towards them, but they are not really able to protect their own way of living, their own, and now of course there is a huge challenge as far as the economies are concerned. So even on the basis of economics, it's also culture, it's economics, their standard of living, their way of living. I think all that is being impacted upon. And you see that there is much greater now focus on the right, which has been basically their basic move has been to keep the immigrants out. We have seen it in a large number of countries, what has been happening. And I think now also in terms of the Israel-Gaza conflict, the sort of demonstrations that have been going on in different countries. I think the people have been, universities, they've been held hostage by these demonstrations. I'm not going, Neha, at the moment into the rights and wrongs of that, whether they did what they did was right or not. But there is this feeling amongst the people that their own way of life is being snatched from them and they are being held hostage to people who have come. They have given refuge to them, they have allowed them to come, and they would expect that there would be some feeling of gratitude that these people have come, but these people who come, not only are they taking all benefits and advantage from these countries, but they also want to impose their own way of living, their own style, their own thinking, their own culture. So I think that has been the major issue, and of course the alarm bells have been ringing, but today I think they are very loud and clear for everyone to hear.
You've summarized it quite well, sir. The alarm bells have been ringing for a while, but now they are loud, clear and unmistakable. And the big question is an anti-immigrant sentiment perhaps the biggest message that people have sent out to political parties in this election? I need to take a quick break. We'll examine this in greater detail on the other side.
There are beautiful golf courses, there are well-played golf courses, there are great greens. But I think we are a combination of everything.
Now, because of the nature-friendly atmosphere here, plenty of water, you can hear the birds. So lots and lots of birds live on this golf course.
Every corner you have a different vista. You have the beautiful Sahyadri range behind you and it's just endless. It keeps going on and on and on and on. So I think no matter what floor you are, you're always slapped in the face by this most amazing view that takes your breath away for a second.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
One of southern India's largest cities is facing a water crisis in Bengaluru.
Water is constantly not coming. From the past 2 months, we are not having some water also.
The citizens deserve water security at the very least.
We are going office without bath.
The acute water shortage really leading to citizens resorting to use of even private water tankers in multiple areas.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
I always feel the first hurdle is the biggest hurdle.
The process is the fruit and it's amazing.
When is the question, whether or not is not the question.
If that were the case, man would have never reached the moon.
World premiere on the 15th of June, only on News9 Live.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now go across to Dr. Gulshan Sachdeva. Dr. Sachdeva, this significant shift across Europe to the far right, what should this tell us? Do you believe that a larger anti-immigrant sentiment is what has driven these elections, and that is the larger message from the electorate to the political parties? Are we now likely to see this putting more pressure even on centre-right parties to take tougher, more hardline positions on issues such as immigration? Are we likely to see tighter border controls and stricter immigration and asylum rules and a push for it in the new European Parliament now?
Thank you for having me. Well, I think as Ambassador Sajjanahar was explaining, now the immigration has been one of the major issue. But you know, if you look at the history of most of the European countries, immigration and right-wing political parties, I mean, these issues are not new. All these right-wing political parties were always there in most European countries, and immigration has been a factor in almost every country, particularly the Western European countries, after the Second World War definitely, even before that. Now, what has really happened now, particularly I would say in the last 15 years or so, since the Eurozone economic crisis, when the Europe is really facing a serious dilemma. Despite all the challenges and difficulties and the crises which Europe has faced in the last 15-20 years, starting from the Eurozone crisis to refugee crisis of 2015, and then Brexit and certain terrorist incidents and many other things, and of course during pandemic many things happened, and now of course the Ukraine war. Still, I mean, Europe is one of the largest economies of the world. Their productivity levels are still high. Many of the countries which are still not part of the European Union in Central Eastern Europe, they would like to be part of the European Union because they feel that that would bring more stability and prosperity into their economies. But the problem what they are facing is that there is a demographic decline. So how do you continue your economies with the less number of people? You can improve your productivity. That's what they have been doing it with all the mechanization in almost every industry. But still you will need people from outside, and that's why the people from outside have been coming to Europe, and they have been welcomed actually in the past. But the model of multiculturalism in Europe has failed. So as a result of this, they have not been able to integrate and assimilate newcomers into the European societies, and that's creating a serious problem for them. And as a result of this, if you can see now all the Eurobarometer surveys which have been done periodically in Europe, the immigration has been one of the top concerns for most of the European citizens. And many of these right-wing political parties, I mean, this has been number one issue for them, which they have been using it. They have always been raising issues about many of the EU policies. Somehow there is a Euroscepticism, in many of these parties. But after Brexit, in fact, I would say the way the problem which have been faced both by Britain and the European Union. Now, most of the countries, they are not talking about moving out from the European Union, whether, even all these far-right parties are not even talking about this. So they would like to change some of the policies of the European Union from within And now they are also getting certain support. But still, by and large, if you look at all these results, as your report you mentioned, close to 60% seats are still with, or even more than that, are with parties which are very much pro-Europe, center left, center right, centralist parties, whether the EPP group, or you look at the Greens, or you look at the Socialist group, and the Renew group. So they will continue to have those coalitions, but at the same time now you would see, maybe on certain issues they would need support even from some of these parties from from these groups, from the ECR, from the and from the I. And some of the other parties, like you mentioned, the German far right party, and also the Fidesz in Hungary, they are not part of any group at the moment. But but ultimately they come together on certain issues. They might even form. In fact, there is a possibility that ECR, IR group, and some of the other parties might form one large kind of the far right group within the European Parliament to push some of their agenda. But as your report mentioned, there has been issue-based coalitions in the past. Those coalitions will continue. But what has really happened now is that as a result of this far-right surge, I would say, at least in some of the countries, they have also forced some of the centrist and the center-right parties also to take positions. Like if you can see, even Ursula von der Leyen's position,
yes,
on immigration, on Russia, on China, she has been quite, I would say, hawkish compared to what many of the earlier centrist
and isn't that the big takeaway, that a lot of these centrist parties are being pushed into a corner? They can clearly see the writing on the wall and are perhaps being pushed to take a more hardline position, which is why we are examining the what ramifications this surge of the far right could have for Europe and beyond. This goes beyond Europe, since we're talking about an issue such as immigration. So let me take this to Chirayu Thakkar. Chirayu Thakkar is, an anti-immigrant sentiment, the biggest message of the voters in this election. And if I may say so, has this also been driven in some measure by an anti-Islam sentiment? And given how immigration seems to be determining the outcome of election after election in Europe, are we almost witnessing some sort of deglobalization now in large parts of the world? As Dr. Sachdeva said, is this in some ways failure of multiculturalism in Europe?
Good evening, Neha, and thank you for having me. I think you have used some of the right catchphrases that actually undergirds this unusual result that we have seen with the European elections this time around. And let me first of all put the numbers in context. If you just look at far right, they have breached 20%, 10 plus 8, 18% of the two major groups, and then you include Fidesz and some of the other groups. They breached the 20% mark, 25% with EPP. They are also center right. Remember, they are not absolutely centrist, which makes around 45, 47%, which says that half of the Europeans are clearly now beyond. They are beyond the right of the center in this new equation. So that is the strength of this coalition, although there are multiple stripes within, as the two speakers have mentioned. Now, you ask for ramifications, you ask for the causes and the consequences. I would say I would broach four major points. First, immigration, multiculturalism, and the likes that we have seen, and the two previous speakers have alluded to it in detail. It is definitely one of the major reasons that we are seeing this setback, and it's not something which has started like in the last 2 years, or it's as if it's a recent phenomenon. When Angela Merkel opened the doors of Europe for the migrants, this process was set into motion. This election results are a culmination of that long-term process. This process was further fueled by what you said, that some of the failures of the globalization project. So European integration has always this promise of better life, better delivery. And what the twin shock of a pandemic and the Ukraine war have delivered is that there is a huge strata, even of the European society, that feels that this project has not delivered to it. And therefore, that is always there. Then on the top of it, as Dr. Sachdeva was saying, that there was always this different form of Euroscepticism. Now, Euroscepticism, very crudely, sometimes it's translated as, remaining outside of Europe. The worst form, like what Nigel Farage carried around, and, Brexit kind of variant. But it's not like that. There are multiple stripes of even Euroscepticism within Europe. Some of them, they just do not want to submit the entire policy making apparatus to Brussels. They want to keep a very strong form of policy making and governance project within national capitals. So I think this is the third factor. And on the top of it, the fourth and the major cause as well as ramification revolves around Ukraine. A lot of Europeans, and Eurobarometer was mentioned, it clearly indicates there are a lot of Europeans which do not think that they owe this much to Ukraine. Now, at the elite level, perhaps there's a consensus that we need to work more towards democracy, barring a small minority like Viktor Orban, who do not think that they ought to join this project. But a lot of people think that Ukraine is not even a part of Europe. Why we are paying this hefty price? Why we have to turn down our air cons in summer? Why do we have to face this cost of living just because we want to save Ukraine? And therefore, the elite consensus and the popular consensus is slightly different, and that is also fueling this resentment. So, these are causes as well as they will have consequences with the surge of right wing. And the 4 points that I have mentioned: migration / multiculturalism, as you can call it. The second is your globalization and economic issues, which are driving Europe today. Third is your Euroscepticism, where they feel there's too much power in Brussels. Not every country would like to go out of the European Union, but they definitely would like to weaken the grasp of Brussels on policy making. And the fourth is the Ukraine crisis.
Okay, very interesting. So, apart from the anti-immigrant sentiment, which seems to be widespread, the Ukraine war is also fueling a lot of this resentment. Cost of living, as we know, is through the roof across Europe, and a lot of people simply do not want to pay that price for the ongoing war. Okay, let me now, ask a different question of my panelists. Let's for a moment focus on the gamble that French President Emmanuel Macron has taken. Ambassador Sajjan Har, why would Macron take such a big risk? I know that irrespective of the outcome of the snap parliamentary poll, he still gets to stay on as president for another 3 years, but an unfavorable result could see his powers significantly diminish. Now, we all recall the overconfidence that was exhibited by David Cameron several years ago, when soon after being re-elected to power in the United Kingdom, he called for a referendum on Brexit in the hope that the issue would be settled once and for all. What happened completely backfired on him and indeed the country, that the Brexiteers ended up winning in that referendum. David Cameron had egg on his face and he ended up stepping down as the Prime Minister of the UK. So I'm going to ask you, why has Macron taken this gamble, in your view?
Yeah, very interesting question. And, you gave the example, of course, of David Cameron. And after that, we've had a succession of prime ministers in the United Kingdom. And I think the United Kingdom, in my view, definitely is still suffering from that particular decision that was taken in 2016. And the instability that we have seen in that particular country. And of course, that has been very significantly compounded by the other challenges that have come, whether it is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, whether it was COVID-19 before that, or it is now Israel-Hamas conflict. These conflicts might be localized for the time being, but in terms of their impact, that is huge. Now, coming to, why Mr. Macron has taken this decision, of course, it is a political decision, and you're very right, irrespective of what the final outcome of these elections is, Mr. Macron will continue to stay. There are two particular outcomes. One is that his party wins either handsomely or is able to get a majority, in which case he will be able to rule and govern with much greater authority because he would have demonstrated that, what happened as far as the European elections are concerned, that was a flash in the pan that does not represent the sentiment of the general masses and the people there. Now, if we have the other scenario in which we have the party of Marine Le Pen that wins and they have a, I think the governance in that sense would become more difficult for him. But he might have thought that with this result having come out, when the party of Marine Le Pen has got 30% plus support and his party has got been able to garner only 15% support, in any case, it would become, governance would become problematic, governance would become difficult, and even though they might not have the numbers in the parliament, but at least they would have numbers on the street and they would be able to tell the people that, this government has not been able, does not have the numbers and does not have the right to govern. So I think he must have calculated this, and of course it does appear to be a snap election, off the cuff reaction. But we'll really have to wait and see how his assessment is placed.
We live in a very uncertain world. Anything can happen. Dr. Sachdeva, Marine Le Pen's party has already humiliated the French president's party in the European Parliament election. Why would he want to take this risk? An unfavorable result, like I said, could land him in a cohabitation scenario where he is forced to appoint a prime minister from the far right. That could make life very difficult for him.
Well, I think in a sense he is trying to call the bluff because European parliamentary elections and national elections of the National Assembly in France, they are two different elections. European elections are based on the proportional representation, means the number of the percentage of votes you will get the seats accordingly. National elections are 2 rounds elections, means in the first round, if any candidate is not able to get more than 50% votes, you go to the second round. In the second round, any candidate who has got more than 12.5% vote of the registered voters would be, only those candidates would stay to contest. Means ultimately they have to get more than 50% votes. So even if you put together both the right-wing parties, far-right parties in France, Marine Le Pen's party and the Conquest party, all together even in this election, they have got about 40%. So what perhaps he would be hoping that there would be now coalition. This is what has happened in France so many times earlier. When even if in the first round they might get more votes, but in the second round everybody else comes together, left and to just keep the extreme right out. Now, in the past, this has worked. Whether this will be working this time, it's difficult to say at this point of time. But I think this is a gamble which he has taken. Basically, he knows that he is not going to contest again because under French law, you can only be president only twice, and this is the second term. So the rest 3 years, basically he would, anyway, it's very difficult at this point of time because he doesn't have majority in the assembly. And immediately after this European elections, I think Marine Le Pen and others are, very vocal saying that he should basically.
But if the right wing trounces his party in the upcoming election, he could end up as a lame duck president for the remainder of his term. 3 years could become very difficult for him.
But French president cannot be lame duck because French president is very, very powerful presidency, particularly on the foreign policy and security issues. Yes, on domestic issues, his influence would be diminished.
Since I'm out of time, Chirayu, very quickly, is Macron's confidence misplaced or is this a shrewd political move? Can he keep the extreme right out by way of this snap poll?
Neha, I think this is purely an act of political brinksmanship based on the idea of split ticket voting, that French voter is very strategic and they would vote one way when it comes to MEP, but they would vote the other way when it comes to national elections, and shifting coalitions, as Dr. Sachdeva was mentioning, could help him do it. It's a absolute act of political brinksmanship, although there is some calculated strategic move as well. But we would have to wait and watch how it unfolds in the days to come. It would be rather premature at this stage to say whether it would pay off or not.
Okay, and we have an interesting date. Eric Ciotti has been expelled from the Conservative Party, the Republicans, in France over plans to ally with the far right. So, will Macron's gamble pay off? I guess we will find out only once the votes are counted. I'm completely out of time, but gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure discussing European politics with you. Dr. Gulshan Sachdeva, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanar, Chirayu Thakkar, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now turn our attention to the ongoing Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. A United Nations inquiry says both Israel and Hamas have committed war crimes. This has been stated in a report on the world body's first in-depth investigation into the 7th October attacks and the ensuing conflict in the Gaza Strip. The inquiry has found that both sides have committed grave violations of international law. The reports released just today cover events up to the end of 2023. The Commission found that Hamas committed war crimes on the 7th of October, the date launched a murder and kidnapping spree in southern Israel, which killed more than 1,200 people and saw about 250 people being taken hostage. Those crimes included intentionally directing attacks against civilians, murder or willful killing, torture, inhuman or cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity in taking hostages, including children. The Commission also found that Israel too committed war crimes as well as crimes against humanity, at least in the first 2.5 months of the Gaza conflict. A crime against humanity is defined as a widespread systemic attack directed at a civilian population. Israel's alleged war crimes include starvation, arbitrary detention and killing and maiming tens of thousands of children. Both Israel and Hamas committed sexual violence and torture and intentionally attacked civilians, according to the UN reports. The Commission said its findings were based on interviews with victims and witnesses, thousands of open source items verified through forensic analysis, hundreds of submissions, satellite imagery, forensic medical reports and media coverage. Israel has accused the fact-finding mission of attempting to justify Hamas's actions of showing systematic anti-Israeli discrimination and contextualizing the attacks through the lens of the Palestinian narrative. The Israeli mission to the UN has said the report failed to mention continuous rocket fire on the country and claimed it outrageously and repugnantly attempts to draw a false equivalence between Israeli Defense Forces soldiers and Hamas terrorists with regard to acts of sexual violence, adding that the Israeli military conducts itself in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law. Clearly, the UN and Israel do not see eye to eye on this. Meanwhile, a US-backed Israeli proposal for a ceasefire and hostage deal appears to be in limbo, with neither side yet publicly committing to the plan as talks continue. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Qatar today, the latest stop on his tour of the region to push for the proposal. Blinken has confirmed that Hamas has proposed changes to the deal, saying some of the changes are workable, some are not. Blinken has questioned whether Hamas is proceeding in good faith amid the ceasefire negotiations. He said, you get to a point where if one side continues to change its demands, including making demands and insisting on changes for things that it had already accepted, you have to question whether they are proceeding in good faith or not. He added that while he believes the current gaps are bridgeable, it doesn't mean they will be closed, saying it ultimately depends on people saying yes, it is time for the haggling to stop and a ceasefire to start.
Israel is committed to these goals: to free all the hostages, to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities, and to ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel in the future. And as we have echoed numerous times in this very chamber, once these goals are met, the war will end. If Hamas were to release the hostages and turn themselves in, not one more shot needs to be fired. Yet sadly, for the past 8 months, Hamas has refused. 120 hostages are still being held by Hamas in appalling conditions. To this day, Hamas continues firing rockets at Israeli towns and cities and advancing their goal of murdering every Israeli. Members of the Council, it is Hamas that is preventing this war from ending. Hamas and Hamas alone.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on the show. Thanks so much for watching. We're leaving you with some more stories that made global headlines today. We do hope you'll join us again at the same time tomorrow.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?